My son called me on Christmas morning last year, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Dad, how do you like the new place? Are you settling in okay?" I was standing in Okafor's driveway at the time, wearing the same flannel shirt I'd worn 3 days in a row, holding a cup of instant coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My back ached from the cot. The space heater in the corner of the storage room had started making a grinding noise the night before, and I'd been afraid to leave it running while I slept. "It's fine," I said. "Everything's fine." That was the lie I'd gotten good at telling. I'd had 2 years of practice. I need to go back a little, because none of this makes sense without understanding what kind of man my son is, and what kind of man I was before all of it happened. Garrett turned 38 this past April. He's a civil engineer, the kind who gets called in when a bridge somewhere is failing or a dam needs serious structural work. He travels constantly. 3 weeks in one state, 6 weeks in another. When he was younger, I used to joke that the only thing he'd ever build that stayed in one place was the birdhouse we made together in the garage when he was 9. He laughed at that joke every time I told it. His mother, Patricia, died when Garrett was 19. Pancreatic cancer. It moved fast, the way it always does with that one. I spent 8 months watching the woman I'd loved for 22 years disappear by degrees, and when it was over, I didn't know who I was anymore without her beside me. But Garrett was still there. And that was enough to keep me moving. For years after, it was just the two of us. He'd finish a job and wherever and come home for a week, and we'd eat bad takeout and watch baseball and talk about Patricia like she'd just stepped out of the room. Those were good years. Quiet, but good. Then he met Lena. I want to be fair here, because I've had a lot of time to sit with this, and I've asked myself more than once whether I was just a stubborn old man who couldn't accept his son choosing someone new. I don't think that's what it was. I tried with Lena. I genuinely tried. I brought a casserole dish to their first dinner party. I drove 3 hours to attend her sister's wedding, even though I'd only met the sister once. When they bought their house, a big colonial on the east side of Delworth, 2 floors, a finished basement. The kind of place I'd worked construction my whole life helping other people build. I showed up with tools and helped them hang every cabinet in the kitchen by hand. She was polite, always polite. She said the right things, smiled at the right moments, touched Garrett's arm in that easy way of hers whenever I was in the room. But she watched me. There was a stillness behind her eyes when she watched me, like she was calculating something I couldn't see the numbers of. I told myself I was imagining it. The stroke happened in February, 2.5 years ago. Not a major one, the doctor said, which is a phrase that doesn't mean what most people think it means. What it actually means is, you will survive this. But things will be different now. My left hand developed a tremor. My balance became unreliable enough that construction work was no longer safe. I was 63 years old. I'd put nearly 40 years into that trade. And suddenly it was over in the space of one morning when I woke up on my bathroom floor and couldn't remember how I'd gotten there. Garrett was in Nevada at the time. A dam project. Something about sediment erosion. Lena drove me to the hospital, sat with me through the initial assessment, spoke to the doctors in her efficient way, took notes on her phone. She was the picture of a devoted daughter-in-law. Later, in the hallway outside my room, I heard her on the phone with Garrett. "He's stable," she said. "The doctors think he'll recover most function. You don't need to come home yet. Finish the week at least." I told myself she was just trying to protect his project, that it made sense not to pull him away unnecessarily. I was stable after all. By the time Garrett came home 10 days later, Lena had already been through my paperwork. Medical bills, mortgage statements, the retirement account I'd partially drawn down during Patricia's illness and never fully rebuilt. She sat across from me at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and went through everything in a systematic, careful way. When she was done, she looked up and said, "Arthur, I think the smartest thing here is to let us help you manage things for a while, just until you're back on your feet." She said it the way you'd say something to a child. Gently, without room for argument. I should have said no. I know that now, but I was 63 and my left hand shook when I poured coffee, and the doctors had told me I shouldn't drive for 30 days, and Garrett was sitting right there nodding along with his wife, And I was tired. I was just so damn tired. I signed the power of attorney documents the following week. The first 6 months were fine. Or they seemed fine. Lena handled the insurance claims, negotiated the medical billing down significantly, and managed the payments on my mortgage. She came by twice a week, brought groceries sometimes, sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and showed me the spreadsheets. Everything balanced. Everything was handled. Garrett called from wherever he was working and told me how lucky I was to have someone so organized looking after things. I believed him. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that by the 8th month, Lena had quietly stopped making my mortgage payments. She'd redirected the automatic transfers, the ones I'd set up through the joint management account she'd convinced me to open, into a separate account I had no access to. She kept showing me the spreadsheets. She'd gotten good at making the spreadsheets say whatever she needed them to say. The foreclosure notice came on a Tuesday morning in October. I opened it thinking it was junk mail. One of those official-looking envelopes that turns out to be a refinancing offer. I read it 4 times before I understood what I was holding. I called Lena immediately. She was calm. Completely calm. She told me there had been a banking error, that she was already in contact with the mortgage company, that it would be resolved within 2 weeks and I should not worry. She told me specifically not to tell Garrett because he was in the middle of a complicated project and stress could derail everything. I waited 2 weeks. Nothing was resolved. I called again. This time she was less calm. She told me I needed to understand that managing my finances had been an enormous amount of work for her. Unpaid work. Work she'd taken on out of love for Garrett and respect for me. She told me that the mortgage company was difficult to deal with, and that my panic wasn't helping. She told me that Garrett was relying on her to keep the home front stable, and that if I went around her to contact him directly, it would create problems in their marriage that I would have to live with. I was 63 years old with a tremor in my hand and a terror of being a burden, and she knew exactly where to press. I waited another month. The bank sent a final notice in December. The house went to foreclosure proceedings in January. I was given 60 days. I called Garrett's cell phone 11 times over those 2 months. 5 of those calls went to voicemail. 3 connected but dropped within 30 seconds. Bad signal on job sites. It happened all the time. 3 actually reached him, and each time Lena had gotten to him first. He'd already been told I was adjusting to a new independence, that I was looking into senior living options by choice, that the house was being sold voluntarily because I found it too large to manage alone. He called me once and asked if I was sure about all this. I opened my mouth to tell him everything, the foreclosure, the diverted payments, the months of being managed and manipulated, and Lena walked in the front door with groceries while I was on the phone. She stood in my kitchen, setting bags on the counter, watching me with that still expression. "Yeah," I said to my son. "I'm sure. It's a lot of house for one person." She smiled at me when I hung up. A small, careful smile. I moved out 3 weeks later with whatever fit in my truck. Okafor and his wife Daisy had lived 3 houses down from me for 11 years. He ran a landscaping crew, had 4 grown children who came home for holidays with their own children, and grew sweet peppers in raised beds along his back fence that were frankly the best I'd ever eaten. When he found me sitting in my truck in the parking lot of the Kroger on the second night after I left, he didn't ask questions. He just said there was a storage room behind his garage he used for equipment, and it had heat and a cot and a half bathroom, and I could stay as long as I needed. I told him it would be 2 weeks at most, just until I figured out my next step. That was 22 months before Christmas morning. The storage room was about 12 feet by 14. I shared it with a riding mower and a wall of garden tools and an old chest freezer that Daisy used for overflow from the holidays. I kept my things in 2 duffel bags stacked next to the cot. I worked alongside Okafor on his landscaping jobs for cash when my health allowed, mostly light work, hauling mulch and planting things, the kind of labor that doesn't demand the precision my tremor had taken from me. Lena came by Okafor's property once a month without fail. She'd park on the street and find me wherever I was working, and she'd take photographs. Always of me doing something active, raking leaves, carrying a flat of annuals, adjusting an irrigation head. Once she actually asked me to stand next to a flower bed and hold a trowel. For Garrett, she said, he worries. I want him to see you're healthy and busy. I held the trowel. I smiled. I was 64 years old and I was sleeping on a cot and I had $11 in my wallet and my heart medication cost $180 a month and I was smiling into Lena's phone camera so she could send the photo to my son with a caption about how well his father was doing in retirement. There are things I'm not proud of in this story. That moment is near the top of the list. Garrett showed up on Christmas morning without warning. He'd told Lena he was flying in on the 26th. Which I know because she mentioned it during her November visit with a specific sort of casualness that meant she wanted me to know I had time before I needed to worry about him seeing me. But Garrett had finished his project early, a bridge assessment in Idaho that wrapped up 4 days ahead of schedule, and he'd booked an earlier flight without telling her. He'd been in the area since the night before. He drove past our old house first, he told me later, the house where he'd grown up, just to look at it. A young couple had moved in. There were kids' bikes on the porch. He found me in Okafor's driveway at 8 in the morning on Christmas Day. I heard his car before I saw him, a rented Chevy Tahoe, nothing like what he usually drove, and the door opened and my son stepped out in a winter coat I didn't recognize, older somehow, tired around the eyes, and he looked at me in my flannel shirt holding my cold coffee, and something moved across his face that I still think about. Not shock exactly, more like recognition. Like he'd known something was wrong for a long time, and his body understood what his mind was only now catching up to. "Dad," he said. "Garrett." My voice came out steady, which surprised me. He looked at the storage room door. The cot was visible through the window. He looked at the cot for a long time without speaking. When he turned back to me, his eyes were red. How long? Almost 2 years. He sat down on the rear bumper of the Tahoe right there in Okafor's driveway. He put his face in his hands. I stood there with my cold coffee, and I waited, because that was all I could do. After a while, he looked up. "I want to hear everything, all of it. Don't leave anything out, because you think it'll upset me." So I told him. All of it, the foreclosure notices, and the phone calls, and the spreadsheets, and the photographs. The 11 times I'd called his cell. The morning I'd had a cardiac episode while planting hydrangeas for a client on Maplewood Drive, and Okafor had driven me to the urgent care, and I'd sat in a waiting room chair for 3 hours because I was afraid to call anyone. The 180 prescriptions I'd been cutting in half for 8 months. Garrett didn't interrupt. He just listened. His jaw tightened and loosened and tightened again, but he listened until I was done. "Okay," he said finally. His voice was very quiet. "Okay." He called Lena from the driveway. I could hear her voice through the phone, warm and surprised, a little theatrical in the way it got when she was performing something. "Garrett, I thought you were getting in tomorrow. I was going to have everything ready. Where are you right now?" A pause. "Home. I just got back from the grocery store. Are you at Arthur's place? How is he?" "I'm at Okafor's. I'm looking at where my father has been living for the past 2 years. Where he's been sleeping. I'm standing in a 12-foot storage room next to a lawnmower, Lena." Another pause. Longer this time. "I can explain, don't." His voice didn't rise. That was the thing about Garrett. He had his mother's way of going cold when he was truly angry, that terrible, measured quiet. "Don't explain anything over the phone. I'll be home in 20 minutes. I didn't go with him that first day. He asked if I wanted to come, and I said no, that this was between the two of them and I'd only complicate it. He left me with his phone number written on a piece of paper, even though I already had it, like he needed to do something concrete, and he drove away. Okafor came out of the house as Garrett's car turned the corner. He'd clearly been watching from the kitchen window. He handed me a fresh cup of coffee, hot this time, and we stood there in the driveway together and didn't say much. "That's a good son," Okafor said after a while. "I know," I said. What happened in that house between Garrett and Lena, I only know from what Garrett told me afterward, over the course of several conversations. I'll piece it together as honestly as I can. She denied at first. Then she minimized it. Then she reframed it. She'd been protecting their marriage, protecting Garrett's focus at critical points in his career, making difficult decisions under pressure without adequate support. She cried. She was very good at crying. Then Garrett asked her about the management account, the one with my diverted mortgage payments. He asked her to show him the statements. She couldn't, of course. The account had been emptied and closed 14 months before. What he found, working through bank records over the following days with a forensic patience I hadn't known he possessed, was this. Approximately $94,000 had moved through that account over 18 months. Some had gone to credit card balances she'd hidden from him, some to a down payment on a rental property she'd purchased in her sister's name, some to things that would come out later through the lawyer, clothing, travel, a home renovation consultation on a property she'd apparently been planning to move into eventually, a house in a town 2 states away where her college roommate lived. She'd been building an exit, while managing my disappearance and managing Garrett's perception of both of us. She'd been quietly constructing a parallel life somewhere else. When Garrett confronted her with the bank records, she made her final play. She told him she was pregnant. I want to be careful here because this matters. She told him she was 6 weeks along. She told him that everything she'd done had been driven by fear. Fear of instability. Fear of financial pressure. Fear that my health problems and financial needs would destroy the life they were building together. She told him that she'd made terrible choices, but that the baby changed everything. That this was his chance to choose his family. Garrett told me about this conversation 3 days later, sitting in Okafor's storage room because I hadn't moved back yet. I still had the riding mower on one side of me and the chest freezer on the other, and my son sat on an overturned bucket and told me about his wife's pregnancy. He looked exhausted and wrecked, and I recognized the specific kind of pain on his face, the pain of loving someone and discovering you didn't know them. What do you want to do? I asked. He was quiet for a long time. I want to do the right thing. Those aren't always the same question. He looked at me. What would you do? I thought about Patricia, about the year we almost didn't make it, early in our marriage when money was brutal and we were both working too much and saying things to each other that took years to unsay. I thought about what had saved us, which was not patience or forgiveness in the abstract, but a specific, concrete decision to be honest with each other, even when it was agonizing. I'd ask her for a paternity test, I said. The silence stretched out. Yeah, Garrett said finally. I've been thinking the same thing. The test came back 3 weeks later. The child was not Garrett's. I'll leave most of what followed to your imagination, because some of it isn't mine to tell. What I can say is that Lena moved out before New Year's. The divorce proceedings were initiated in January. The rental property in her sister's name was discovered and frozen as part of the financial fraud investigation Garrett's lawyer opened. The $94,000 figure turned out to be conservative, closer to $112,000 by the time everything was traced. Garrett moved back into the house alone. I moved back into the spare room. Not as a charity case. As his father, which is different. Lena came to the house once, in late January, while Garrett was at a project review meeting in the city. She rang the doorbell, and I opened it. She looked different. Not broken, exactly, but stripped of something, the smooth, professional veneer gone. Just a woman in her mid-30s standing on a porch in the cold. I didn't hate you, she said, without preamble. I know. You were a problem I didn't know how to solve. You were sick and broke, and I didn't know how to integrate that into the life I thought we were building. She looked at the porch boards. I told myself you were fine, that you were resourceful, that you'd land on your feet. I did land on my feet, I said. Barely, and not the way you'd prefer, but I did. I'm sorry, Arthur. I looked at this woman who had taken 22 months of my life, who had turned my son into an unwitting instrument of neglect, who had used my love for Garrett as a lever to keep me compliant and quiet, and I believed her, strangely enough. Not that the apology changed anything, not that it balanced any ledger, but I believed it was real. I know you are, I said. I didn't invite her in. We stood there for another moment, and then she nodded once and walked back to her car, and that was the last time I saw her. Spring came, and Garrett's schedule stabilized for the first time in years. His firm had given him a regional assignment, less travel, more desk work, a trade-off he'd resisted for a decade but finally accepted. He said it was time to stop moving. I thought he was right. We settled into something that I wouldn't have known how to describe to my younger self. A rhythm of two men living in the same house and genuinely enjoying it. He cooked on Tuesdays and Thursdays because he'd gotten good at it somewhere along the way, and I'd never noticed. I fixed things because 60 years of building and repairing meant I could look at a problem in a house and usually understand it. We watched baseball on weekends and argued about the same teams. We'd argued about the same teams we'd argued about since he was 12 years old. Some evenings, I'd sit in the workshop I'd set up in the garage. Garrett had cleared it out and put in proper shelving and task lighting without saying much about it. Just did it one Saturday while I was at a doctor's appointment, and I'd work on furniture. A side table, a set of display shelves for a neighbor down the street. A jewelry box for Adeiz Okafor, who had made me more meals in 2 years than I could count. I was working on a rocking chair in May. A piece of white oak I'd been planning for weeks, when Garrett came into the workshop and stood in the doorway for a minute without speaking. He did this sometimes. Just checking in, I think. Making sure I was there. "Who's the chair for?" he asked. "Undecided," I said. "Might keep it. Might sell it. Depends how it comes out." He watched me work for a while. "Dad, there's something I want to ask you." I set down my plane and waited. The firm wants me to lead a long-term infrastructure project. 18 months, probably 2 years. He paused. "It's based in Asheville, North Carolina." I nodded slowly, understanding what was coming. "I don't want to do what we did before," he said. "I don't want to be somewhere else while you're here, having to wonder." "I'm fine, Garrett. I've got the house. I've got Okafor next door." "That's not what I mean." He leaned against the workshop doorframe. "I mean, I don't want to do it. I spent the last several years of my career being somewhere else. I miss things I can't get back." He looked at the rocking chair. "I'm asking if you'd consider coming with me. We'd find a place with room for a proper workshop. Asheville's supposed to be good for craft work, a lot of artisan market people, furniture people. You'd have customers inside a month." I looked at my son, 38 years old, standing in my workshop doorway on a spring evening, asking his father to come with him. Not out of guilt, not as an obligation, just because he wanted me there. Patricia would have loved this, I thought. She would have sat right down on the nearest surface and cried, which is what she did when she was happy. "Asheville," I said. "Yeah, I'd need to finish the chair first." He laughed. Actually laughed the way he used to when he was young, surprised out of himself. "Of course you would. And I'd want to bring the Okafor family something proper before we leave. I've been thinking about a dining table for them. Something that'll last." "Deal." We moved to Asheville at the end of June. Garrett found a house on the western edge of town with a detached outbuilding that I converted to a workshop in the first 2 weeks. He was right about the craftwork community. By August, I had more orders than I could comfortably fill, and I had to start a waiting list, which is a problem I'd never had before and which turned out to feel remarkably good. I still think about those 2 years in Okafor's storage room sometimes, not with bitterness mostly, more like the way you think about a scar, present, visible if you look for it, but no longer the main event. What I think about more is what I almost didn't do. I almost stayed silent that Christmas morning. I almost said, "Everything's fine," and let Garrett go back to the carefully managed version of my life that Lena had constructed. I was 65 years old and tired and ashamed of how things had fallen apart, and the easiest thing in the world would have been to keep pretending. I didn't. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe I was just too cold and too tired and too done with it all to maintain the performance one more day. Maybe some part of me recognized that my son was standing right there and he was asking, and that if I didn't answer honestly then, I might not get another chance. What I know is this: truth doesn't fix everything. It doesn't undo 2 years or return a house or give back the mornings I woke up stiff and alone in that storage room, wondering what I'd done wrong. It doesn't unbreak the things that got broken, but it's the only material you can build anything real with. I've worked with wood long enough to know that you can't make a sound joint out of rotten timber. You can sand it and stain it and make it look fine for a while, but eventually the structure fails. Start with honest material. Everything else follows from that. Last month, Garrett drove us out to a spot he'd found in the hills west of town. A clearing in the trees with a view of the ridgeline. The kind of place that makes you feel small in a way that's actually comfortable. We brought sandwiches and 2 old folding chairs, the kind I used to take to his Little League games 30 years ago. We sat and ate and didn't talk for a while, which is one of the underrated privileges of being a father and son who have come through something hard together. "You okay?" he asked eventually. "Better than okay?" He nodded, looked at the ridge. Mom would have liked this. She would have already had plans to build something out here. A cabin, probably. She'd have been measuring the clearing before we finished the sandwiches. He laughed. Yeah, she would. The light was doing something complicated through the trees. The late afternoon kind that makes everything look like it's been thought about carefully. I sat in my folding chair on that hillside next to my son, and I thought about what the last 2 years had cost and what they'd given back, and how those two things don't ever balance out the way you'd want them to, but sometimes you end up somewhere better than where you started anyway. The rocking chair was back at the house, white oak, finished with linseed oil, joints tight enough that it would probably outlast both of us. I decided to keep it. Some things you make for yourself. Not because you've earned them exactly, just because you're still here and still building, and that turns out to be enough. I've been thinking lately about what it actually costs to stay quiet when you should speak. Not the dramatic kind of quiet, not refusing to testify or hiding evidence, just the ordinary, everyday kind where you say, "I'm fine," because you're ashamed, or because you don't want to be a burden, or because some part of you has started to believe the story someone else is telling about your life. That's the cost I paid. 2 years in a storage room while my son believed I was thriving. 2 years of splitting heart pills in half and telling myself it was fine, that I was handling it, that Garrett was busy and I'd figure something out. What I was really doing was making it easier for a lie to survive. Every time I said everything's fine into that phone, I was adding another layer of insulation around the truth. I don't say that to beat myself up. I say it because I've watched enough people in my 65 years make the same calculation. This isn't the right time. I don't want to cause trouble. It'll work itself out. And I've seen where that math leads. It leads to 2 years. It leads to Christmas morning in a driveway, your son staring at a cot through a storage room window with red eyes. What I've come to understand is that staying silent isn't actually the humble, selfless choice it feels like in the moment. Silence about something important is its own kind of decision, and it has consequences that ripple out past you. Garrett lost 2 years of knowing his father's real situation. He lost the chance to make an informed choice about the kind of son he wanted to be. I took that from him by protecting him from the truth, the same way Lena took it from him by hiding it. The method was different. The result wasn't. Lena's story didn't end the way she planned, because the kind of life you build on deception has a structural problem baked in from the start. You can paper over it, manage it, redirect attention from it for a long time, but the load-bearing elements aren't sound. The $112,000 didn't disappear. The rental property didn't stay hidden. The paternity test said what it said. None of that happened because she got unlucky. It happened because she built on rotten timber, and rotten timber eventually fails. That's not a moral judgment. That's just how structures work. What held, in the end, was the simpler thing. Garrett standing in Okafor's driveway. Me telling the truth for once. All of it. Without editing for his comfort. A father and son deciding to move in the same direction. Those things held because they were built on something real. Not perfect, not painless, but real. I'm in Asheville now, and my waiting list for custom furniture is 6 weeks long, and some mornings I stand in my workshop before the light is fully up, and I just run my hands over whatever piece I'm working on and feel how solid it is. That's the thing about well-made joints. They don't announce themselves. They just hold. I think that's what I'd want anyone to take from all of this. Not that bad things don't happen to decent people, because they clearly do. Not that the truth fixes everything instantly, because it doesn't. But that the capacity to bear witness honestly, to what's happening to you, to what you've done, to what you've allowed, is the foundation that everything else gets built on. Without it, nothing you construct will hold the weight you put on it. With it, even something broken can be repaired into something stronger than it was before. The rocking chair is on my porch. White oak. It'll outlast me by a long shot. That feels about right.